My brain has been all over the place lately, so forgive me if it turns a little rambly. But talk about finances. First, we heard from Joe Otto, who talked about how God provides for us, and the passage where he says, "Go ahead and test me." Unless I'm mistaken, the only time he says, "Go ahead, you can test me," and see if I provide. Giving rise to the saying, you can't outgive God. And if my informant is correct, last week we heard from Mark and Sarah, who talked about how God provided when finances were not quite so liquid, and yet they chose to continue giving to the church. Today I want to tell you about a time in my family's history when God provided. And looking back on it, it seems quite frivolous. And yet it was formative for me, as the story has been told over and over again in my family's history. You see, when I was younger, I was homeschooled, and that meant my mom stayed home and homeschooled us, and my dad worked, sometimes 2 jobs, to make ends meet. And it must have been one of our birthdays, my brothers or I, and we wanted to go to the children's casino, otherwise known as Chuck E. Cheese. So it must have been when we were younger. In any case, money was tight. And my mom and dad talked about it. And it was at a point, they really wanted to be able to do something special for us. But they weren't sure we could afford that. And so they said, if we have enough change in the coffee can, some of you remember the dad having a coffee can on the dresser and putting all the loose change into it at the end of the day. If there was enough money in that, probably, I think she said, like, if there's $50, then we can go. So very industriously, we gathered together, got all the coin wrappers and wrapped all the coins and counted them out, and it came down to $50, almost to the penny. And ever since, my mom has pointed and said, "See, God provides." And it's not that he provides for our every whim and, we wanted to go to Chuck E. Cheese's. But he used that opportunity to provide, to anchor in me this understanding that he is good. And when we put him first, things somehow work. And I think Hannah would like to play off of that some.
Yeah, I want to leave us with a question that's been really helpful to our family over the last few years especially. A few years ago, I started thinking about how even in Christian finance and budgeting programs and mentoring things, I always heard the question phrased as like, well, how much should you give? And I thought that's kind of a weird question if you're not asking how much is enough? How do you decide when what you have is enough? And recognizing that and living out of that and living out of a confidence that God's going to give you enough and more. And you don't need to be scrimping about ooh, can I afford to give $20 or like $21? You can know when you have enough and feel very free to be generous with what God has given you. And I think this doesn't apply just to money, but to energy and to time and to how much house is enough, how good of a car is enough, how much entertainment is enough. And it frees you up, and it has freed us up to be generous in ways that aren't just, this is our budget for giving, okay, it's gone now. And this question of how much is enough is really counter to our culture, which is always telling us you deserve more, and you should have the best and the most of everything that you can possibly afford. And it also is very counter to our human nature, or at least my human nature, and I'm going to guess that yours is similar, that is always happy to justify why I deserve something a little more and a little nicer, and really, that would be great. But that this question of how much is enough, what can I be content with? Where can I instead say, God has given me plenty? That's a practice. And it takes practice to look at what God has given and say, wow, that's great. I have enough. And I think if this doesn't come naturally to you, have hope. It's an exercise and a practice, and you can get better at it. You can recognize in your life gifts from God, and instead of feeling stressed about how much can I give, no, God is so good to me in so many ways, and recognizing that helps to change your mindset about giving and change you into a person who wants to be generous to others because God is generous and kind to you. That's it. We're done.